My boss fired me in front of the entire team. And called me just a coordinator. Not a strategist. Not a manager. Not someone the company depended on. Just a coordinator. Then he smiled, looked around the room, and said, "We'll finally run things properly without unnecessary layers." Everyone nodded. No one questioned it. No one asked what I actually did. Because on paper, he was right. And that was his first mistake. The meeting ended like nothing happened. People closed their laptops, picked up their coffee, and moved on, like they had just watched a routine decision, not the moment the company quietly removed the only thing holding it together. I stayed in my seat for a few seconds. Not shocked. Not angry. Just clear. Clear in a way I hadn't felt in years. Because for the first time, I could see the full picture. For 4 years, I sat between two worlds. Internally, I was support. Externally, I was the person every serious client depended on. I didn't present. I didn't stand in meetings. I didn't take credit. I translated client expectations into actions. Confusion into clarity. Problems into decisions. And most importantly, I prevented things from breaking before anyone even noticed they were close. But none of that shows up in a title. Coordinator sounds replaceable. That's why he felt confident saying it out loud. That's why no one pushed back. That's why the decision felt easy. Because from the outside, it was easy. I packed my laptop slowly. Not because I needed time, but because I was thinking. Not about what I lost. About what they just exposed. My phone buzzed. One message. Then another. Then 3 in a row. Clients. Not casual ones. Not low priority accounts. The ones that mattered. "Hey, quick question. Are you still handling our side? Can you confirm who we should speak to now? Something feels off. Call me." I looked at the screen, then leaned back in my chair. They didn't know yet. Not officially. But they felt it. That's how strong systems work. You don't notice them when they're there, but the moment they're gone, something feels wrong. And right now, something was starting to feel very wrong. I stood up and walked out of the room, past the same people who had just watched me get erased. No one stopped me. Because to them, nothing important had just happened. And that was their second mistake. As I reached the exit, my phone buzzed again. Call this time. I looked at the name. One of the biggest clients. I didn't answer. Not yet. Because something had just shifted. For 4 years, every problem moved toward me. Now, it wasn't going to, and the moment they realized that, they weren't going to ask for a coordinator. They were going to ask for me. I didn't answer the call. I just stood there for a second, watching the screen light up. Then go dark again. Not because I didn't want to talk. Because I wanted to see what would happen if I didn't. For 4 years, I was the first person everyone called when something felt off. I picked up immediately. Fixed things before they escalated. Smoothed problems before they became visible. Now, I wasn't going to. And that changed everything. I walked out of the building without looking back. No one stopped me. No one asked questions. No one even realized what had just been set in motion. Because from their perspective, they had just removed a coordinator. From mine, they had just removed the system. My phone buzzed again before I even reached my car. Same client. This time, a message. "Hey. Tried calling. Need clarity. Something isn't lining up." I read it once. Didn't reply. Another message came in. Different client. "Quick one, who's taking over our account?" Then another. "We're getting mixed responses. Can you confirm what's going on?" I leaned against the car and exhaled slowly. This wasn't panic. Not yet. This was the early stage, the part most people underestimate. The moment where things don't look broken, but stop making sense. And when things stop making sense, trust starts to crack. I opened one of the internal dashboards on my phone. Just to check. Just to confirm what I already knew. Everything was still green. On the surface, nothing had changed. Deadlines intact. Status updated. No escalation flags. To anyone looking at the system, everything was fine. But systems don't measure reality. They measure activity. And activity can lie. Because what actually mattered was happening outside the system. In conversations. In expectations. In small details no one tracked. I locked the screen and put the phone away. Another call came in. I didn't check who it was this time. Didn't need to. Because the pattern was already clear. They weren't calling a role. They were calling continuity. And continuity had just disappeared. I got into the car but didn't start it. Just sat there, thinking. Not emotionally. Structurally. Because this wasn't about being fired. That part didn't matter. What mattered was what came next. And more importantly, what I didn't do next. For years, every time something started slipping, I stepped in. Quietly corrected things. Realigned expectations. Closed gaps no one else even saw. That instinct was still there. Strong. Automatic. But this time, I stopped it. Because stepping in now wouldn't fix anything. It would hide it. And hiding it was exactly what allowed this to happen in the first place. My phone buzzed again. I looked this time. Different client. One of the most demanding ones. The kind that doesn't tolerate inconsistency. Message. Let me be direct, are you still involved? Because something feels off. I stared at it for a second. Then typed. I'm no longer with the company as of this week. Sent. No explanation. No context. Just truth. The response came in less than 10 seconds. That's a problem. I nodded slightly. Not because I agreed. Because I already knew. Another message followed. Who's handling things now? I didn't answer. Because the moment I answered that, I'd be fixing it again. And this time, I wasn't going to. I put the phone down. Started the car. And drove away. Behind me, everything still looked normal. Same building. Same people. Same structure. But underneath, the alignment was gone. And without alignment, everything else follows. I reached home and opened my laptop. Not to check emails. Not to monitor what was happening. But to think. For the first time in years. Without interruption. I opened a blank document. No title. No plan. Just space. And then I started writing. Not about the company. Not about what happened. About how everything actually worked. What clients really needed. Where things usually broke. What signals mattered. What mistakes cost the most. All the things that were never written down. Because they were never supposed to be visible. I mapped everything. Not names. Not deals. Just structure. Because structure is what survives. Hours passed. No distractions. No noise. Just clarity. By the time I stopped, I realized something I hadn't fully accepted before. I had never been just a coordinator. I had been the bridge. The filter. The stabilizer, the part that made everything else make sense. And now, that part was gone. My phone buzzed again. I didn't check it immediately. But I already knew what it was. Not confusion anymore. Not simple questions. Something heavier. Because the moment clarity disappears, pressure replaces it. And pressure always reveals the truth. I picked up the phone. Looked at the screen. 5 missed calls. 7 new messages. All from clients. And none of them were asking for a coordinator. I didn't reply to any of them. Not immediately. Not because I was unsure. But because timing mattered more than action. For years, I had been the one absorbing pressure before it surfaced. I translated urgency into calm, confusion into direction. I kept everything aligned so well that no one ever saw how fragile it actually was. Now, for the first time, I was watching it unfold without interference. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Hey, we just got an update from your team. It doesn't match what we agreed last week. I read it slowly. That sentence alone told me everything. They had already tried to replace me. And they had already failed. I opened the dashboard again. This time on my laptop. Apex, still green. Velocity, still green. North, bridge, still green. Everything looked perfect. And that's how I knew it was about to break. Because when reality and reporting stop matching, collapse isn't coming. It's already happening. I leaned back in my chair and closed the laptop. This wasn't something I needed to track. It was something I had already designed. Every system has pressure points. Moments where small misalignments create disproportionate damage. And I knew exactly where those points were. Because I had been holding them together for years. My phone rang again. Same demanding client. This time, I answered. Tell me what's going on, he said immediately. No greeting. No build-up. Just pressure. I'm no longer involved, I replied. Silence. Then a slow exhale. That explains it. Not emotional. Not surprised. Just confirmed. We've had 3 different answers in the last 12 hours, he continued. None of them align with what we signed off on. I didn't respond. Because this wasn't a conversation. It was a realization. That's not going to work for us, he said. I nodded slightly, even though he couldn't see me. I understand. Another pause. Then his tone shifted. What would you do? That question mattered. Not because he needed advice. Because he was testing something. Positioning. Trust. I took a second before answering. I'd simplify it, I said. How? Remove the layers that create confusion. And keep only what actually drives decisions. Silence. Then. That's what you were doing, wasn't it? I didn't answer directly. Didn't need to. Yeah, he said quietly. That's what I thought. We ended the call without anything formal. No agreement. No next step. But something had already changed. Because now, he wasn't comparing people. He was comparing outcomes. And that comparison always leads to the same conclusion. My phone lit up again. Different client. Then another. Then another. Same pattern. Different wording. Same realization. Things feel off. We're not getting clear answers. This doesn't match what we discussed. That's how it spreads. Not through announcements. Through experience. I stood up and walked to the window. The city was moving like nothing had changed. Traffic. Noise. Movement. Everything looked normal. But inside the company, alignment was collapsing in real time. And no one at the top understood why. Because they were looking at metrics. And metrics were still green. I went back to my desk and opened the document I had started earlier. Read through it again. Cleaner this time. Sharper. Not just notes anymore. A system. One that didn't depend on titles. Didn't rely on visibility. Didn't require translation. Just clarity. My phone buzzed again. Message from an unknown number. I opened it. Hey, got your number from one of your clients. Quick question. Are you available independently? I stared at it for a second. There it was. The shift. Not internal. External. And external pressure is what breaks internal structures. I didn't reply immediately. Not because I was hesitating. Because I was thinking. About positioning. About timing. About control. Because this time, I wasn't reacting. I was deciding. Another message came in before I could respond. From a different client. Let's be direct. If things don't stabilize, we're out. I nodded slightly. Again. Not surprised. Because this wasn't about service anymore. It was about trust. And trust had already started moving. I finally replied to the first message. I'm available for independent advisory conversations. Sent. No pitch. No push. Just presence. The response came instantly. Good. We need that. Of course they did. Because what they were losing wasn't execution. It was clarity. And clarity always finds a new place to exist. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a second. Not tired. Focused. Because now the system was shifting. Away from them. Toward me. And once that shift starts, it doesn't reverse. My phone buzzed again. But this time, I didn't feel the urgency to check it. Because I already knew what it was. More questions. More pressure. More confirmation. Not for them. For me. Because at this point, they weren't trying to find a coordinator. They were trying to find the one thing they had just lost. And they were starting to realize. It wasn't replaceable. By the next morning, the tone had changed. Not the volume. Not the speed. The certainty. Messages weren't asking anymore. They were deciding. My phone lit up before I even opened my laptop. We're pausing deliverables until this is clarified. Another one. Hold all timelines. We need alignment before we move. Then a third. If this isn't fixed today, we're reconsidering the contract. I read them in silence. No surprise. No reaction. Just confirmation. Because once clients stop asking questions and start setting conditions, you've already lost control. I opened the dashboard again. Apex, yellow. Velocity, yellow. North, bridge, still green, but flickering. That's how it starts. Not failure. Instability. And instability spreads faster than anything else. Because clients don't operate in isolation. They talk. Quietly. Directly. Efficiently. And once 2 or 3 of them compare notes, the narrative collapses. My phone rang. Unknown number again. I answered. Hey, I'll keep this short. New voice. Confident. Direct. We're hearing the same issue from 2 other accounts. There it was. Cross confirmation. The point where doubt becomes conclusion. We can't operate like this, he continued. So I need to understand. What actually changed? I didn't explain the structure. Didn't describe the roles. Didn't correct the narrative. I'm no longer there, I said. Silence. Then a quiet response. Then that's the change. Exactly. No emotion. No debate. Just logic. We'll give it 24 hours, he said. After that, we move. Move. That word carries weight. Because it doesn't mean negotiation. It means exit. We ended the call. I placed the phone on the desk and didn't pick it up again. Because at this point, everything was already in motion. I didn't need to push anything. Didn't need to accelerate it. The system was collapsing under its own assumptions. I opened the document again. Refined a few sections. Simplified others. Removed anything unnecessary. Because clarity isn't about adding more. It's about removing what doesn't matter. Another message came in. From the executive. We need to talk. Urgent. I stared at it for a second. Then locked the screen. Not yet. Because now, urgency wasn't mine anymore. They were reacting. I was building. There's a difference. And that difference decides who controls the outcome. My phone buzzed again. Same executive. Clients are escalating. Of course they were. Because escalation isn't a reaction. It's a signal. And signals like that don't stop. They compound. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and came back. Everything felt quiet. Not outside. Inside. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying anything. No responsibility. No pressure. No need to fix what wasn't mine anymore. And that clarity made everything obvious. Another call came in. I checked this time. My old boss. I let it ring. Not out of emotion. Out of finality. Because there was nothing left to discuss. No explanation that would change the outcome. No conversation that would restore what was already gone. The call stopped. A message followed. Pick up. This is getting out of control. I read it once. Then put the phone face down. Because that sentence said everything. Out of control. That's what happens when you remove the part that creates alignment. Control doesn't disappear immediately. It erodes. Then it's gone. My laptop screen dimmed. I tapped the keyboard. Looked at the document again. This time, it felt complete. Not perfect. But real, something that didn't depend on being hidden. Something that didn't rely on someone else presenting it. Something that could stand on its own. My phone buzzed again. Different client. Short message. We're out. No explanation. No complaint. Just a decision. That's how serious clients move. They don't argue. They leave. I nodded slightly. Not because it felt good. Because it was expected. Another message came in. We're reviewing alternatives. Then another. Let us know when you're operating independently. There it was again. Not a question. A direction. Because when people lose clarity, they don't wait. They move toward it. And right now, clarity wasn't inside the company anymore. It was here. With me. I closed the laptop. Leaned back in my chair. And for a moment, everything was still. Not because things had settled. Because they had already shifted. Completely. Irreversibly. Behind me. They were trying to fix something they didn't understand. Trying to stabilize something they never controlled. Trying to rebuild trust they never owned. And in front of me, there was nothing to fix. Only something to build. Something cleaner. Something stronger. Something that didn't depend on being invisible. Because in the end, they didn't lose a coordinator. They lost the only thing that made everything else make sense. And by the time they realized it, it wasn't a mistake they could correct. It was a reality they had to live with. By the end of the week, they stopped calling it a transition. They started calling it a problem. Not internally. Not in reports. In conversations that weren't meant to be documented. My phone buzzed again. Same executive. Different tone. We've lost 2 major accounts. I read it once. Didn't respond. Another message followed. And 3 more are at risk. Of course they were. Because this wasn't about losing accounts. It was about losing consistency. And consistency is what clients actually pay for. I placed the phone down and didn't pick it up again. Because numbers don't change outcomes. They confirm them. I opened my laptop and looked at the system I had built. Clean. Direct. No layers. No confusion. Just flow. Everything I had been doing for years. Without needing permission. Another message came in. Different client. We've officially terminated. Effective immediately. No explanation. No negotiation. Just action. That's how serious decisions look. Quiet. Final. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Just completion. Because at this point, there was nothing left to prove. The system had already spoken. My phone buzzed again. This time, I checked. My old boss. Again. Then another message. Call me. We need to fix this. I stared at the screen for a second. Then locked it. Because that sentence carried something important. We. For years, that word never included me. Now, it needed me. And that was too late. I stood up and walked to the window. The city was still moving the same way. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. But somewhere inside the company, everything was shifting. Meetings getting longer. Answers getting weaker. Confidence getting thinner. Because once trust is gone, everything else feels unstable. I went back to my desk. Opened the document again. Read through it one last time. No changes. No additions. Because it was already what it needed to be. My phone buzzed again. Another client. Short message. We're ready when you are. I didn't reply immediately. Not because I was thinking. Because I already knew the answer. This wasn't about timing anymore. It was about direction. And the direction had already changed. I typed. Soon. Sent. No details. No promises. Just certainty. The response came instantly. Good. Of course. Because clarity doesn't need explanation. It just needs to exist. I closed the laptop. Sat back in my chair. And for the first time since everything started, I allowed myself to look at it from a distance. Not the events. The pattern. 6 years of invisible work. 4 years of being underestimated. 1 decision that removed everything at once. And 5 days. That exposed the truth completely. Not because I fought it. Because I stopped holding it together. That was the difference. That was always the difference. My phone buzzed one last time. I checked. Message from the CEO. Short. Direct. We misjudged your role. I read it. Didn't feel anything. Because that sentence wasn't recognition. It was realization. And realization only comes after the damage is done. I placed the phone face down. Stood up. Walked away from the desk. Not because I was done. Because I was finally free. Behind me. They were trying to rebuild something they never understood. Trying to replace something that was never documented. Trying to explain something that could only be experienced. And none of it was working. Because in the end, they didn't lose a position. They didn't lose a coordinator. They lost the one thing they never knew they depended on. The thing that made everything else work. Without ever being seen. And once that disappeared, everything else followed. Quietly. Completely. Irreversibly. By the time the weekend hit, the noise stopped. No more urgent messages. No more escalations. No more attempts to fix anything. Not because things were solved. Because decisions had already been made. Quiet ones. Final ones. The kind that don't need follow-ups. My phone stayed still for most of the morning. And that silence said more than all the calls combined. Because when pressure disappears suddenly, it doesn't mean stability. It means withdrawal is complete. I made coffee and sat down without opening my laptop. For once, there was nothing pulling me back. No system to monitor. No client to stabilize. No gap to close. Just space. And in that space, clarity. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the last few days. Messages. Calls. Decisions. A pattern so clean. It almost felt engineered. One point of failure. Removed. Everything follows. Not chaos. Not explosion. Just separation. Clients moving away from confusion. Poured clarity. And that movement was now irreversible. My phone buzzed once. A new message. Different number. I opened it. We've heard about you from 2 different clients. Let's talk. I stared at it for a second. Then locked the screen. Because this was no longer reaction. This was positioning. And positioning requires control. I stood up and walked to the window again. The city looked exactly the same. But I didn't. Because for the first time, I wasn't inside someone else's system. I was outside it. Which meant I could finally see it clearly. All the inefficiencies. All the assumptions. All the invisible dependencies. And more importantly, how easy it was to rebuild it better. My phone buzzed again. Same executive. Different message. We're restructuring. I almost smiled. Not because it was wrong. Because it was too late. Restructuring works when the system is intact. Not when trust is gone. I didn't reply. There was nothing to add. Because this wasn't a structural issue anymore. It was a credibility issue. And credibility doesn't come back through internal changes. It comes from external belief. Which they had already lost. I went back to my desk and opened my laptop. Looked at the system again. Clean. Focused. Intentional. Not built for appearance. Built for function. Exactly the opposite of what I had just left. Another message came in. Client. We're aligning internally. Expect to move forward with you soon. I read it. Close the screen. No rush. No urgency. Because this time, everything was coming to me. Not the other way around. And that changes everything. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence sit. Not uncomfortable. Not heavy. Just complete, because the story had already ended. Not when I got fired. Not when clients started calling. Not even when they started leaving. It ended the moment I stopped fixing things. That was the turning point. That was the shift. Everything after that was just the system catching up to reality. I picked up my phone one last time. Scrolled through the messages. Then locked it. No need to respond. No need to explain. No need to prove anything. Because the outcome had already spoken. And in the end, that's all that ever matters. They said I was just a coordinator. And for years, that was the story they believed. Until the moment they had to operate without me. And realized they weren't running a system. They were relying on one. And that system was never theirs to begin with. By Monday, there was nothing left to escalate. No urgent threads. No let's jump on a quick call. No last attempts to patch things together. Because there was nothing left to patch. The accounts that mattered had already moved. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Precisely. Completely. I didn't open my laptop right away. I didn't need to. Because once decisions reach that stage, data stops being useful. It just confirms what's already done. My phone buzzed. A message from the CEO. Short. Direct. We'd like to make this right. I read it once. Then place the phone down. Not out of pride. Out of accuracy. Because making it right assumes something still exists to fix. And it didn't. Another message followed. We can discuss a new structure. Better terms. Full ownership of your scope. Ownership. That word finally showed up. Too late. For years, I had operated without it. Delivered without it. Carried everything. Without it. And now, when everything had already shifted, they were offering it. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a second. Not thinking. Just recognizing the pattern. Value ignored when it's quiet. Recognized only when it disappears. And by then, it's no longer available. My phone buzzed again. Different client. We're ready to start as soon as you are. I opened my laptop this time. Not to check anything. To begin. I pulled up the system. Reviewed the structure. Adjusted one section. Removed another. Everything tighter. Cleaner. More direct. Because now, there was no need to translate anything for anyone. No internal layers. No misalignment. Just execution. Another message came in. Former colleague. Things are bad. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't care. Because there was nothing useful I could add. He sent another message. They didn't realize how much you handled. Of course they didn't. Because what I handled was never visible. That was the point. I closed the chat. Looked back at my screen. Everything in front of me was mine now. No interpretation needed. No approval required. No one else taking credit. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered. Hey, we heard you're operating independently now. I didn't correct him. Didn't clarify timelines. Because at this point, perception was already moving in that direction. We'd like to work with you directly, he continued. Simple. Clean. Decisive. That's what trust sounds like. Let's set a time, I said. We did. No negotiation. No hesitation. Just alignment. I ended the call and set the phone down. Then looked at the screen again, for a moment. Everything felt quiet. Not because nothing was happening. Because everything was already aligned. No friction. No confusion. No gaps. The exact opposite of what I had left behind. I stood up and walked to the window one last time. Same city. Same movement. But a different position. Because now, I wasn't inside the system trying to hold it together. I was outside it. Building something that didn't need to be held. And that's the difference most people never understand. Fixing something keeps it alive. Building something replaces it. Behind me, they were still trying to fix. Still trying to explain. Still trying to recover something that depended on me being invisible. And in front of me, there was nothing to recover. Only something to grow. Because in the end, they didn't just lose clients. They didn't just lose revenue. They didn't just lose control. They lost the one thing they never measured. The person who made everything work. Without ever needing to be seen. And once that was gone, everything else followed. Exactly the way it was always going to. By the second week, they stopped reaching out. No more messages. No more calls. No more offers. Not because they didn't need me. Because they understood. I wasn't coming back. And even if I did, it wouldn't fix anything. My phone still buzzed. But it felt different now. No confusion. No urgency. Just alignment. Let's lock this in. We're ready. Send your structure. Short. Clear. Final. The same clients who once went through layers. We're removing them. I opened my laptop. Pulled up the system. This wasn't notes anymore. Not ideas. Execution. Clear entry points. Clean flow. No confusion. No interpretation needed. Everything built to do one thing, remove friction before it starts. That was always the difference. Not effort. Not intelligence. Clarity. My phone rang. Apex. I answered. We're out, he said. No build-up. No emotion. Just a decision. We've started the transition, he continued. And we want to rebuild with you. There it was. Full circle. The account that held everything together was gone. And now it was moving toward me. When are you ready? He asked. I paused. Soon, I said. Same word. Same tone. Because now, I controlled the timing. We ended the call. I placed the phone down slowly. No reaction. No celebration. Just awareness. This wasn't a win. It was a shift. A complete one. I stood up. Looked around the room. Quiet. No pressure. No noise. Just control. For years, I worked inside someone else's system. Now, there was none above me. Only mine. My phone buzzed again. A message from a former colleague. They're trying to explain what happened. I almost smiled. Explanations only come when things don't make sense. And nothing they said would fix this. Another message came in. Clients are asking for you directly. Of course they were. Names don't matter. Patterns do. Before, stable. After, unstable. That's all anyone needs to see. I didn't reply. There was nothing to add. The story had already played out. I went back to my desk. Opened the system again. Looked at it one last time. No changes needed. Everything was aligned. No gaps. No hidden pressure. No weak points. Just clarity. And clarity. Scales. I closed the laptop. For the first time, I stepped away completely. Not to rest. Because there was nothing left behind worth checking. The outcome was already decided. They said I was just a coordinator. And for years, that worked. Because I allowed it. Because I stayed quiet. Because I kept everything running without needing recognition. Until the moment they had to run it without me. And realized the truth. They didn't remove a role. They removed the system, and once it was gone, everything followed. Not loud. Not chaotic. Slow. Precise. Inevitable. Because in the end, they didn't lose control in one moment. They lost it the moment they misunderstood where it came from. After that, things didn't speed up. They settled. And that's how you know it's over. Not when everything is loud. When everything goes quiet. My phone stopped buzzing every minute. Messages became fewer. But stronger. More decisions. Less questions. We've finalized the exit. We're transitioning away. We'll start with you next week. No hesitation. No doubt. Just movement. I didn't rush anything. That was the difference now. Before, I reacted. Now, I decided. I opened my laptop again. Looked at the system. Not to fix. Not to improve. To scale. Because what I built wasn't just working. It was attracting. Clients weren't asking if it works. They already knew. They felt the difference. Clarity versus confusion. Alignment versus noise. And once someone feels that difference, they don't go back. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered. We've been following what's happening, he said. We want in. No introduction. No explanation. Just intent. That's how real demand sounds. When do you start? He asked. I already did, I said. Silence. Then a short response. Good. We ended the call. No pitch. No selling. Because when something is clear, it doesn't need to be sold. I leaned back in my chair. And for a moment, I replayed everything. The meeting. The word coordinator. The silence in the room. The decision. All of it felt distant now. Not because it didn't matter. Because it already did its job. It revealed the truth. Not to them. To me. My phone buzzed again. A message from my old boss. Short. You could have helped fix this. I read it once. Then locked the screen. Because that sentence carried the last misunderstanding. I didn't break anything. I just stopped fixing it. And there's a difference. A big one. I stood up and walked to the window again. The same view. But a different position. Because now, I wasn't inside the system trying to hold it together. I was outside it. Watching it fade. And building something stronger in its place. My phone buzzed again. Client. Send us the next step. I replied. Tomorrow. That was it. No long message. No explanation. Because now, everything was simple. Clear input. Clear output. No layers. No confusion. Exactly the way it should have always been. I went back to my desk and closed the laptop. Not because I was done. Because I didn't need to do more today. That was new. For years, I carried everything. Every issue. Every delay. Every risk. Now, nothing was on me unless I chose it. And that changes how you move. How you think. How you build. I picked up my phone one last time, scrolled through the messages. Clients. Decisions. Movement. Then I stopped. Because one thing became very clear. They didn't walk out because I left. They walked out because the system stopped working. And the system stopped working. Because it was never a system. It was me. And once that disappeared, everything else followed. Exactly like it was always going to. By the third week, there was nothing left behind. No accounts to recover. No timelines to fix. No explanations to give. Just absence. And that kind of absence can't be reversed. My phone buzzed, but now it felt controlled. Not constant. Not urgent. Just precise. Contract signed. Kickoff confirmed. Team aligned. Short updates. Clear direction. Everything moving forward. Without friction. I opened my laptop and reviewed the first active rollout. Clean structure. Defined ownership. No confusion. No one asking, who handles this? No one waiting for clarification. Everything just moved. That was new. Not the work. The flow. Because for years, I wasn't just doing the work. I was fixing the flow. And now, there was nothing to fix. My phone buzzed again. A message from a former colleague. They're still trying to stabilize things. I read it. Then another message came in. More clients are leaving. Of course they were. Because once trust breaks, it doesn't pause. It spreads. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't care. Because I already knew the outcome. And knowing the outcome removes the need to react. I stood up and walked to the window. Same view. Same city. But now, everything felt aligned. No pressure in the background. No hidden problems waiting to surface. Just clarity. I went back to my desk and checked the system again. Everything was where it should be. No noise. No overload. No unnecessary movement. Just execution. My phone buzzed again. A message from the CEO. Longer this time. We're restructuring everything. Trying to rebuild trust. If you're open to discussing. I stopped reading. Not because I was avoiding it. Because it didn't matter. That conversation belonged to a version of me that didn't exist anymore. I locked the screen. Set the phone down. And didn't pick it up again. Because at this point, there was nothing they could offer that I didn't already have. Control. Clarity. Ownership. The three things I worked years without. And now, had completely. Another message came in. Client. We're expanding scope. Let's scale this. I nodded slightly. That's how growth starts. Not forced. Not planned in slides. Just demand meeting clarity. I replied. Let's do it. Simple. Because complexity was never needed. I closed the laptop and leaned back. For a moment, everything felt still again. Not empty. Complete. Because the story had already finished. Not when I got fired. Not when clients started leaving. Not when they realized the mistake. It finished when I stopped being invisible. That was the shift. That was the line. Everything before it was survival. Everything after it was control. I picked up my phone one last time. Scrolled through everything. Then locked it. No need to revisit it again. Because the outcome was already clear. They said I was just a coordinator. And for years, that label defined me. Not because it was true. Because it was accepted. Until the moment it was tested. And failed. Completely. Because in the end, they didn't misunderstand my title. They misunderstood my impact. And by the time they realized the difference, they weren't trying to replace me anymore. They were trying to explain why they couldn't. And that's a position you don't recover from. Ever.